All right. Okay. Thank you, everyone, and welcome to Procurement with a Purpose. This is the last session in our four-part series, bringing together folks from the U.S. community and rethinking procurement in the U.S. And at the local level. So this is building your YES team, culture and performance for outcomes-driven procurement. And again, please keep introducing yourselves in the chat. And yeah, we'll get going. Thank you so much for joining us today. Before we start, and while folks kind of stream in, I want to give a quick introduction to who we are at OCP. My name is Keisha Bwenge, and I'm the Senior Community Building Manager. Open Contracting Partnership is a DC-based nonprofit. We work globally and across sectors to open up public contracting and support reformers like you. We focus on data and stakeholder engagement, and we're really on a mission to transform government procurement in the US from a compliance-driven chore that benefits the few to an open and results-driven service that delivers value for all. And that's why we are so excited about this webinar series. We're really thrilled to be growing our US network, and we want to hear from you how we can best support you as you implement your reforms, advocate for better procurement and investing in procurement, and building community with your peers. And on the note of community, we invite each of you throughout this call to share your ideas and your insights, get inspired from your peers who are often working through the same challenges in procurement reform. If you have anything to add to the conversation, please feel free, pop it in the chat, raise your hand, go off mute. The floor is yours. And we really want this to feel participatory and interactive, and we know that you have great wisdom to share. And also, if you want to stick around after the call, after each of these calls, we have a little after party where a few of us are happy to take more questions and have an informal chat. We have Sasha Hesselmeyer, who's the author of the reports that this series is based on, which is Serving the Citizens, Not the Bureaucracy. And a few of the OCP folks will also stick around. We had a very fun after party last time. A few of the folks on this call might remember it. So yeah, we encourage you to stay in and chat with us. And we're really looking forward to this agenda today. I'll do some quick intros to our amazing panel, and then we'll get started. So we have four awesome guest speakers with us today. We have Mandu Sen, is the Interim Deputy Director of the Mayor's Office of Food Policy at the City of New York. Bruce D. Collins is the Purchasing Director of the City of El Paso. Another El Paso rep, Aimee Olivas, who's the Socioeconomic Compliance Officer of the Purchasing and Strategic Sourcing Department at the City of El Paso. And Beth Blauer, Associate Vice Provost for Public Sector Innovation at Johns Hopkins University. And then we have our facilitators, including myself, Sasha Hesselmeyer, who I just mentioned, who's the founder and CEO of CityMart and New America Public Interest Technology Fellow. We have Riley Martin, who is also at OCP and is our Senior U.S. Program Manager. So if you have any questions about our U.S. strategy and approach, feel free to reach out to her. And myself, Senior Community Building Manager at OCP. And finally, we wanted to do a little bit about you all. We're really excited to have participants coming from across the country. Between all of our four calls over the past couple of months, we've had representation from almost 60 cities and municipalities in the US, and we've added a few since the last session. We also have over 30 folks from around the world who registered for this. So thank you to all of our global partners who've joined us over the past couple of months. And if you see any gaps on the map where you have folks that you know or can reach out to, we really encourage you to sort of share the series with them. We will be sharing recordings and takeaways in our blog. So we're happy to keep spreading the word long after this is done. So we have a quick activity to get us all jump started in this. It's a chat waterfall. So I want you to think about this question, and I'll give you a minute or so. And then on the count of three, I'm going to have everyone type it in and hit send and respond to the chat at the same time. So we'll see this waterfall of responses coming at once. So the question that we have for you all is, what is one word that you would use to describe the current culture of procurement teams or departments in your experience? What would you say, one word that really just covers the culture of procurement, the culture around procurement? I'll give you a second to think of your answer and type it out. Have it ready in the chat, and then on the count of three, we're all going to hit send. Okay, folks, it's coming in. So let's just go. 3, 2, 1, put it in. Okay, really interesting. We have magic, siloed, resilient, compliance pressure cooker. Thank you, Sasha, for making that one word. We have another compliance answer here, curious and afterthought, Sharon. That's a powerful one as well. Really process oriented, a bit fearful, gatekeeping, broken, antiquated, tired. Yep. All of these absolutely describe procurement. Competitive. We had a couple folks say competitive. So as you can see here, lots of room for improvement in procurement. I mean, cheers to the optimist. And, I think procurement is very, yes, magical and resilient. But I think a lot of us are also noticing that things need to change, and the status quo on procurement is no longer working for us. It's no longer working for cities and the people who live in them. So our conversation today is going to be about the culture of procurement and how procurement teams and departments internally can, use accountability and data and culture change and management to really start the change at home and begin that transformation for our cities. So I will kick it to Sasha, who will be facilitating our discussion and starting us off with a quick case study showing what the future can look like.
Yes, thank you, Keisha. And the case study here is a story about, and I'll pick up some of the words in the chat, about a procurement team in Liverpool that was fearful, that was an afterthought, and actually began to feel quite comfortable in the afterthought. So the case study, and you can read more about it in the report, is really the arrival of a new chief procurement officer in the city, and whose diagnostic was that when he arrived, the department really was not approached by other departments for support until the very, very last minute of projects. The department was actually hidden behind other departments physically, and no one could actually see them. And the team got quite a little bit, it was a little bit gloomy, the atmosphere, as he described it. But what Trevor Ingham did when he arrived, he actually began to invest in the department and developing more specialized procurement skills so that the team would be more confident on less repetitive procedures and more finding the best way to help their internal clients, and also specialize the team on categories. And categories in the UK mean that you have segments of the market like social care services that people specialize in and do really deep market research. And he also made the team more outgoing. He actually said, we have to go out, we have to market ourselves to other departments, we have to be helpful, and we have to be seen as a valuable collaborator. And 4 years into that transformation, he didn't really replace the people, but 4 years into it, the department became the de facto innovation team of the city of Liverpool by going out, helping other departments to foresight, seeing what trends are in the market, what new ideas are emerging, and really quizzing buyers who have needs in departments, quizzing them about really what they're asking for, if it is truly future-proof, if it is aligned with the other priorities of the city, and if it reflects the latest that the market can give. So this was like a very brief turnaround story under the heading, turning a kind of hidden team into a team of procurement extroverts. And I want to use this to kind of jump straight into our conversation here with the panel. So I'm really grateful to have Aimee, Beth, and Bruce and Mandu join me here in this panel conversation. And just to explain how I'd like to kind of structure the panel, I'll direct some questions more specifically at our panelists so that we can cover a broader range of topics. I've encouraged the panelists to kind of follow up on any question they couldn't answer if they have important additions to make. And please also, panelists and anyone else, please use the chat to contribute anything that comes to your mind that should be shared with the group. But my first question here is to kind of frame us. So the report that I wrote was written for the year 2030. What is our vision for procurement? Because oftentimes we're fixing incrementally without knowing where we're going. And the report was also written for a global audience. The Chicago Council on Global Affairs has a global reach to cities, and so it is generic on many issues. And what I would like to kick us off with is to talk about which parts of the report, when we talk about culture and staffing of procurement teams, but also when we talk about performance management, which of the ideas resonate with the work you guys are doing in the US right now, and also thinking about the future? So I'll start. I'll go alphabetically, if that is okay, for the first round of questions, and I'll address this to everyone. Aimee, why don't you have a first go at answering what kind of pieces in the report seemed useful to you or meaningful to you on that note?
Perfect. Thank you all. First of all, thank you for OCP and Sasha and to have us here sharing our experience here within the city of El Paso. We're really excited to be here. So in regards to the first question, the report talks about empowering procurement teams, publicly celebrate the professionals, the successes, the contributions. I can really resonate that and really give kudos to Bruce, because a lot of the different efforts that we have going on, he really celebrates us and allows us to be put in a position where we can truly grow from what we're doing. Even for this panel, for example, he recommended that I take part in this panel. So really rewarding collaboration, innovation, and the right kind of professionalism. I feel like that really resonates with us, and even other members of the team. He really gives us the opportunity to be innovative with a lot of the different areas within procurement. And so we're really thankful that we have somebody that can support us on that end. Now looking at 2030, the city of El Paso has a strategic plan that we really try to align a lot of our different efforts to it. So every year we do have a session where we plan out, okay, what did we accomplish this year? And then in 5 years, we take a look once more at some of our goals and what really we need to meet. So for us, it's really taking a look at not just procurement as a whole, not just it being, buying just to buy, but really how can we work together with the different departments, really pushing employees within procurement to be innovative and really helping out not just our internal customers, which are the city departments, but also helping out our residents, which are our primary customers. So, all I want to say is really leadership being really supportive is definitely a huge bonus for us.
Wonderful. Thank you. I think if I'm not mistaken, Beth will go next. And I have to say, Beth, I loved reading your manuals for performance management and metrics as I wrote the report. When you read the report at your end, or when you looked at some of its findings, what was there that was like, oh yeah, that's not just familiar, but maybe that would be meaningful for everything in so many communities you're involved in?
Yeah. So, well, there are a couple of pieces that really stuck out to me, and I'm going to start first with leadership, which is, this isn't just about like establishing the right culture within the procurement team. This is about getting a pivotal shift in leadership to think about procurement not as a barrier, but as an actual lever. And it was something that was really echoed throughout the report, which is like, we've got to move away from like looking at procurement as a roadblock and seeing it as the actual mechanism for getting us closer to outcomes that people in our communities really care about. And leaders don't know how to talk about procurement in that way, but they do know how to like be very negative about procurement and talk about all the challenges. And because it's typically the only thing they hear, right, is like how terrible and broken the system is and how they can't do things and they're told no. And so one of the things that was deeply resonating with me is this notion of having a yes team, like getting to yes. And when we talk about performance management at scale in government, we always ask to have a yes lawyer on our team because one of the most like immediate what I would consider a false barrier to actual progress in moving organizations forward are typically legal barriers, where teams that don't want to do the work, that are afraid of change, that have some of that cultural inertia, they will immediately create sort of these legal barriers that feel like showstoppers. And if you don't have a yes lawyer who can hold that risk, who can say, okay, I'm going to examine the legal framework that will actually get us closer to outcome. Let's have a conversation about outcome and we can talk about the barriers in a separate track. I think it makes it really difficult to center the conversation on what is it that we're actually trying to accomplish. And so really emphasizing across the entire spectrum of the report that let's keep the outcome at the center of what the objective is when we're talking about procurement. And then let's have different sort of wraparound supports to the process itself that can hold that risk, that can take out of the process the capacity to create these barriers to moving processes forward. And so it requires leadership. It requires leadership, first of all, to have a value of procurement and to see it as a partner in solving hard challenges, in actually improving conditions in communities, and a common vocabulary that allows people to have an anticipated interaction with the process itself. And so, you know, performance frameworks are really great at this because they in the best and well-developed examples that we've seen of these in cities across the globe, they have these levers that they can rely on. And procurement is perhaps the most significant one. Procurement, HR, we think about these as from a deficit perspective, and we got to get out of that. We got to start thinking about it as actual, these are the ways that we move government forward and bringing them along in these journeys instead of keeping them relegated into being sort of the problem child and something you have to work around in order to actually do the work you want to do.
Thank you, Beth. Bruce, Aimee already raised the bar very high for you. You're an exceptional leader, and together with OCP over the last few months, I've learned so much about some of the amazing things that are happening in El Paso around the procurement team. That's the now, and I kind of want to ask you whether. When you think about 2030, like what are the ideas that resonate with you where you would say, here we can set our sights to kind of like a new horizon. Here's something that actually might be meaningful for us.
Thank you, great question. I want to thank Aimee for her kind words. Beth, I'm going to invite you to our city council meeting to talk about procurement. That framework is exactly what leadership needs to hear. But when I think about 2030 and where procurement would be if I had a canvas, one of the things that we would definitely want procurement to be is inclusive, where our external business community and our community feels that the city is listening to what the expectations are for the citizens, and also that all of our suppliers feel that they're equally included and engaged in the process in a meaningful way. So we always use the story that it's one thing to be invited to the party, but it's another thing to have planned what the music is. And so 2030, just having an inclusive process for all of our suppliers, one where we focused on the results of the customers. Within our strategic plan that we will reference in everything we do, and purchasing is aligned to accomplishing the strategic goals. Our number one customer for the city is our citizens. So we're focused on delivering services to the citizens. How we get there is through having integrity in our process, being inclusive, but also making sure in 2030 that we don't use technology for the sake of technology, because we always have to remember, we don't want to use technology to eliminate certain segments of the business community. We know that perhaps in 2030, similar to what the hospitals are doing now with using IBM's Watson, what intelligent technology and will we be using in 2030? Will it eliminate the participation of some of the smaller disadvantaged groups? So we have to be mindful not to implement any technology we want to do it for efficiency, but it's going to eliminate some of the participants in the process. And so I'm going to just add on to what Beth said, because Beth really spoke to it. And I want to focus on culture, though. Culture within an organization. It starts at the top. And what we often say for purchasing and in our leadership meetings is that allow purchasing to participate as a consultant. Invite us in early in the process so we can find the appropriate pathway to achieve a specific goal, not to get to a particular vendor or supplier, but the desired outcome that's in alignment with the strategic plan. So thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. And I want to use that. It's a kind of perfect segue when we speculate about the future. Throughout this webinar series, we came back to the question of food, because food seems to be the battleground, or one of the battlegrounds in which the future is already coming together, where we think about who are the users and the beneficiaries of procurement, what does quality look like, what does sustainability look like, what does equity look like. So I'm really grateful that we have Mandu Sen with us. And Mandu, I hope your connection trouble is solved. There you are, I can see you. I had to scroll a little bit. Mandu, which parts of these issues we raised in the report kind of resonated with your work? And I want to acknowledge that you're coming out of the pandemic. That's how we got to meet one another. We're talking about your COVID response and being innovative there. So when if you can even think about 2030 right now, like what are the things where you were like, oh, that could be meaningful to us?
Yeah, absolutely. Can everyone hear me all right? Apologies. Speaking of challenges of city procurement, unfortunately, we have not so great internet connectivity, Wi-Fi connectivity here, and we have to wear masks. Yes, anyway. One of the challenges with food policy and procurement is that food policy is often instant, and people who work in food policy, and I think this is generally, a challenge with procurement. Government is procurement, and a lot of people who think themselves of housing experts and transportation experts and things like that don't actually make that connection. I was a regional and urban planner before that, and I knew as a policymaker, I knew woefully little bit until I came into government about procurement, to be completely honest. And I'm kind of embarrassed about that, even though procurement was the tool to get everything I wanted to get done. And yet I knew almost nothing about it, and I didn't know why it wasn't working as it should. And I was writing all these reports about how to get all these amazing things done, and yet I didn't know why even the basic things weren't getting fixed. Food policy in particular represents, I think, a real conundrum, and this is one of the areas where the report particularly resonated. A lot of food policymakers come from, first, food is very immediate and instantaneous, and people, come to it from this idea of a meal and it's daily. Then a lot of people with food expertise come from the field of emergency food, where, whether it's food pantries or responding to an immediate crisis, they're used to operations moving quickly. They're certainly not used to necessarily thinking long-term, 10 years, about systems that you really need to lift the hood and think long-term planning to make things happen. So I'm really glad that you started with the Liverpool example and gave more color around how that worked, because I mean, the entire report was wonderful, but something that resonated to me, and I didn't even think about putting it that way, is really like, how do we get our advocates and our electeds and people maybe, certainly leadership, and that 100% agree with everything that was said before, but before, you know, the leader, whoever that is in whatever municipality, makes procurement the priority, there needs to be an entire ecosystem of, whether it's journalists or in advocates and policy experts and all, you know, the full ecosystem, people who care about procurement and are willing to care about it. And we definitely had a lot of conversations where you'd mention procurement and people would just, their eyes would just glaze over, or you'd start trying to begin to understand it and it would feel, and I think my words was impenetrable. It feels impenetrable and you're trying to understand and you can't. Why are things like happening this way and not this way? Why does it take so long? Why can you do this and not that? So rethinking it, you know, becoming a procurement extrovert, that's almost, you know, unthinkable. That really, really resonated. I think all of the details are, you know, all right on. But without that mindset of procurement as a priority, we can't let it be something that is, you know, a secondary or tertiary, you know, something that's behind the scenes, you know, it's just an accounting thing that somebody takes care of and hopefully it's okay. It's core. And you have to care about the details and you have to, you know, be excited about it. And, you know, you have to point, you know, empower people and, you know, not necessarily assume that whoever's there is a disgruntled bureaucrat, and either empower people or hire people, whatever the specific situation is, to make procurement great. And some of it maybe is some institutional change, but some of it is just frankly leadership, whatever the fix is. But I think the other thing is also priorities, right? Like I think certainly in New York City, we do so much and teams are often pulled between all these different priorities. I thought the Scotland example was also really excellent, because the combination of a strong procurement process, but also an engagement process that took the principles of participatory budgeting and said, look, you get to participate, or you not got to participate, you get to decide, but you also have some real life constraints. That's really powerful. And that's something could really, if we could figure out how to operationalize that in real time, those two things together, that would be really powerful. Because that's the other fear that everyone in government always has. Well, if we ask for input, people will ask for, you know, 2 moons and a pool on their roof, right? Like, or something equally improbable.
Thank you. That's kind of, I'm glad to hear that this resonates. And I think another big point the report makes, not so much maybe the topic today, but we can gravitate that way, is the question of how the public is involved. Beth and Bruce, you're both incredible leaders and performance management nerds. And I'm going to direct the next question to both of you, and starting with Beth, which is something I grappled with when I wrote the report, is that clearly, and I interviewed tons of people, we want more creative people in procurement. We want people that think critically, that can question the status quo, that have commercial thinking skills. And we want this culture that is extrovert, outgoing, and problem solving. And yet at the same time, there is a tendency, especially in government bureaucracies, to hardwire performance management into really, really detailed workflows and procedures that kind of stifle creativity. And the question I began to ask myself was like, we can't have it both ways, right? We can't hire a team of amazing people and then force them to work through these impossible procedures. So Beth, I'd love your thoughts on kind of how we can combine those two worlds into like a tangible, measurable progress, at the same time enabling that creativity and creative thinking we so desperately need to get that additional value out of procurement.
So I think about this when I think about data practices in government, performance management practices in government, procurement practices in government. We're missing like a key position in government. And so when we think about the plan for 2030, especially, one of the things that the private sector has, and I am not a type of person that's like, we need to replicate what happens in the private sector. I know government has very distinct objectives that look very different from the bottom lines in the private sector, but there is a role in the private sector that is so compelling that is called a product manager, which actually bridges the gap between leadership and thought leadership and specific SMEs or subject matter experts and the technical people that have to actually do delivery. In software, it's like the gap between engineers and the actual product designers, right? And in government, we need people who have the capacity to understand what the potential is of procurement or the potential of data, but that can also extract like the problem statement out of the leadership in a way that is deeply connected so that there is an alignment between what's being thought about in terms of strategic vision or what are the goals of the organization and actual what can happen. When there's a disconnect between what a leader comes to the table and says, this is what I want to have as my, I have a goal for X, Y, and Z. And the program team is like, what is this person talking about? We don't do that. That has nothing to do with what we need to do for delivery or the legal frameworks or whatever it is. That disconnect oftentimes can like absolutely derail. So when we talk about a hardwired performance management process, I get like incensed because these are actually supposed to be platforms for how we solve hard problems, and they must be fluid because we need to be able to say like, oh, this program actually doesn't work. If we have invested in something or we have purchased something and it actually isn't meeting the need of the program, then we need to be able to have the agility to say, we need to change course. Yes, we thought that was the best practice. It turns out it's not delivering the desired result. So we need to be able to have the agility to say no. And a product manager would help do that, right? It would be able to help continuously bridge those gaps so that leadership is deeply aware of the capacity of the operations of the organization, but without having to actually relent on what that kind of North Star is and where they're taking the organization. And it doesn't exist. So what ends up happening is that you get a leader who says, okay, I want to solve crime in my community. And then they have to go to procurement and IT and all of the operational divisions and say, I need you to partner with me on solving crime. And IT's like, I'm not a crime solving organization. I can like give you computers, but you need to tell me how computers are going to help you solve crime. And I want to, procure things differently or purchase things differently. And you know that it's broken when it comes to the crime fight, but you don't know how. And so having a little bit of an intermediary there is important. But some of the attributes that we need to see in the organizations of the future is that agility and not these fixed notions of like the kind of feed the beast reporting that we've seen historically in performance programs and in data programs.
So if this all sounds like wishy-washy wishful thinking, I think first of all, Riley outed herself as having been a product manager in government. So let's all crowd around her. But actually, we in the report, I have to confront you with this reality. The UK is really far ahead on procurement, and one of the secrets to their ability to procure so much better is that they introduced a new role into government called the commissioner, which is basically people who are trained and who have a set of skills, you can find that described in the report, to actually manage service outcomes, aggregate all the different resources and assets of the city and government and across other actors, and redesign services to secure the better outcomes, and actually then use procurement as an extension to that role. And it's been incredibly transformative, and it has been around for more than 10 years. And I think it's an incredibly, what you're describing, Beth, is a really entrepreneurial role, right? Like someone who actually, and product managers and companies have that kind of bridging also with actually making the product work, not just putting it out there, but actually getting it to work as you described. Bruce, as someone who oversees both a wonderful team who clearly love you and and a set of procedures that are probably hardwired into El Paso's way of doing things. Tell us a little bit how you see that relationship, that kind of tension between, or that seeming tension between managing performance, being rigorous, and giving freedom to the people to build a great culture, to kind of encourage creative and critical thinking and adapting to changing needs.
I think there should always be, and we should expect, a natural tension between the user departments in our community and what purchasing will do. That's a natural tension that exists because we can perform, but there's always the expectation of doing things better. What the city of El Paso has created, to Beth's point that she's speaking to, we've created a chief innovation officer within the city and a performance office. So together, those individuals with their staff will look through all of the city departments and services that we provide and look for opportunities for improvements based upon citizen feedback and the other internal departments. And it's almost like a department complaint box to some degree. And procurement is always going to be identified as something that people perceive that can be improved. So what we've done with the performance office, we're encouraged to think outside the box and reimagining it. And we will have cross-functional teams from all of our stakeholders, and in some cases, even from the business community to participate in a Lean Six Sigma Kaizen event, for example, of how we can eliminate the efficiencies and the redundancy and do it better, quicker, more efficiently, and not just about the process, because we have true stakeholders that are involved in it. Our business community may be on that Lean Six Sigma team. And so when we do the process remapping, we always have some regulatory box that we have to fit into. We will look at what can we do to change some of those regulations, because currently in the state of Texas, we still have to mail out invitations to our vendors and put things in the newspaper. No one reads the newspaper anymore, right? So, but that is an archaic item that still exists in the state code. So we work with our other procurement leaders around the state of changing the state code, and even some of our own internal legislation that the city has. We will look at going to council, modifying those, and then redoing a process through a Lean Six Sigma or just our innovation process to change it internally so we become more effective and more efficient in how we deliver the service.
That's wonderful, and it's I'm really impressed also the relationship you have with the innovation and performance team in kind of spreading those skills to actually innovate, design, rethink processes, which is kind of just already a kind of departure from what in many places still is seen as a very clerical function, right? That procurement just does things, whereas I think one of the things that I found in the report and in much of the work I've done before is that procurement is already creative, right? You can use it for good or you can just sit on it, but you always have a lot of decisions involved. Mandu and Aimee, I kind of wanted to ask you, when we think about where we could be in 2030, and when we think about performance management, what would be like the one or two things that you would hope we would measure performance by of procurement in 2030? And you know, you don't have to generalize for everything, and certainly not in New York City with so many things, but I would love to hear, what would you like to kind of use as a North Star to see if procurement is doing a good job? Maybe Aimee, I'll stick to the alphabet. Maybe we start with you.
Yes, no, of course. You know, one of the things that we really we pride ourselves in is our service delivery to our customers, which again, it's our residents. So for us, you know, I feel like it would be measured by our contributions to our customers. I mean, normally internally we measure things, you know, through KPIs, but really even now until then, what kind of impact have we made on our residents of our community? What kind of feedback can we obtain from the voice of our customer to really make these improvements down the line that can really be where we want to be in 2030. So for us, you know, in 2030, we really want, for example, our business community to describe that, you know, the procurement process was an inclusive, open, competitive, transparent, fair, respectful, you know, kind of that goal that we want to get to, but really have our residents, have our business owners really understand that what we're doing at the end of the day goes towards improving the quality of life, the quality of place of our residents. So, and to us, all of that is ingrained within our mission, vision, values, our strategic plan. So really following that at the end of the day really is our contributions to our customer and that service delivery that we offer.
Thank you. Mandu, over to you.
Well, there's the primary goals, which are kind of like the obvious goals, but I'll state them anyway, which is, you know, are the procurement solving for the policy goals of the city? And then there's the secondary, which is just the process itself. Is it better, right? Is it smoother? Is it more, is it faster in the case of the city? Is it more transparent? Is it easier to navigate? All those things, which are quite a challenge, can be quite a challenge. Then there's the impact of the procurement itself, share of MWBE's alignment and coordination with the city economic development strategy and regional economic development strategy, alignment, you know, with other values. For example, in the case of food, you know, is a food we're purchasing not just nutritious, but also supporting a healthier environment and farm workers, etc., things like that. So in addition to just thinking about the city's own policy goals, thinking several layers up.
That's so that sounds so easy, right? And so obvious, and you stated it. And when I did the interviews for the report, I asked everyone I spoke to the same question. Today, in your mind, is city procurement, public procurement, serving the government or the citizen? And it became the kind of guiding question for the report, because everyone without exception admitted that it is designed to serve the government, and in particular the bureaucracy, more than it is to achieve those outcomes, Mandu and Aimee, that you guys talked about. And I think it raised another question. If we were to transition it, if we were saying it's directed at serving our community and delivering better outcomes, it suddenly is no longer this underfunded clerical operation, the kind of like the back office that shuffles paper around that it's often designed to be, but it suddenly becomes part of getting good results. And I think one of the biggest global challenges we found is a real lack of investment and a real lack of a willingness to invest in the process. So for example, we know that citizen engagement, vendor engagement, these are things that multiply the value we get from procurement. I mean, procurement is moving billions and trillions of dollars, and yet we're saving on the process that could have these transformative results. So I want to come back to all of you a little bit, like if we wanted to get to a place where procurement was truly serving the citizen and was incentivized and optimized to get that, what will we need to do to get to that dream team, right? Procurement as the, yes, here's how we can help you, here's how we can get better results function. What could the journey look like? What could be the 3 or 5 steps we would kind of need to take to get there by 2030? I'll go the other way around now. Mandu, I'll start with you to kind of shuffle up the alphabet a little bit. But what do you think New York City and others could do over the coming years to actually make that possible?
Well, I'll start with 2 steps. The first is frankly convince the immense civic infrastructure, again, as journalists, advocates, electeds, the whole leadership, that they should focus razor sharp on improving procurement. And the second is identifying a couple of priorities for procurement improvement, whichever they are. Again, there's a lot of disagreement in New York, but there are also some clear things that everyone can agree on. Improving public housing and improving the subway are 2 good examples of things that I think there's a broad acceptance on. So razor sharp focus on those things and getting some results quickly would probably, or any such priorities, I think would just create some self, getting some would I think generate some goodwill and build around culture of supporting procurement.
Bruce.
I think having just 2-way communication between our customers and the city regarding the priorities. So as the customer engagement as to what are the priorities, so that our strategic plan and our activity aligns with meeting these priorities for the citizens. In our particular case, when we have the chime-in process through our budgeting, we've established all types of methods for the citizens to identify what the priorities are. That information is then placed into a strategic planning session where we identify that based upon the citizens' response, here are the projects that we're in focus on, so that all the internal services now know that for the city, roads and infrastructure are the number 1. Public safety is number 2. Educational and the other amenities fall down further. So now when our director of streets and facility maintenance, when we start off the year, purchasing in our consultant role, now know that we have to engage the department early once the budget is approved and figure out when are we planning these items out. So as we share, you all know that similar to New York, Aimee's developed the buying forecast for our business because we can plan it and know what the priorities are, but we also have to engage our suppliers so that they know these projects are coming. But I think that 2-way communication between the citizens and purchasing, and also purchasing with our internal departments, have to improve. I will often ask the question to the department, if our performance needs to be at a level that if the city had a choice to bring in a third-party contractor to do the work or to keep us, would we be the first choice? So, and that's a reality that some organizations have faced. Some organizations have been outsourced because of the perception of their performance versus the reality. But we have to operate in a manner of getting these things done in accordance with the priorities established by the city, so that the question is ever asked, the response will be, we want to keep the purchasing team, both from the internal user departments and from the public.
That also, I think, Bruce, what you're describing there also means the competence and capability of your users, the public, to actually participate and increasingly engage in these questions, right? And Mandu referred earlier to that example of Scotland. In Scotland, the transport procurement, where citizens actually took charge of the entire process, which are all variations on the same question, like how do we build a relationship between how we're designing and prioritizing and procuring services in dialogue with the communities they're serving. Beth, what do you think we could be doing over the next 9 years or so to get to that nirvana procurement.
Is that, and this is in the US context, right? We're talking about in the US. Okay, so I think there's like one thing that has to happen as a threshold issue, which is we need to have a reckoning with what procurement means in the American context. It has deep roots in some of the most divisive, racist policies that governments have implemented. And there have been generations of reparative attempts at creating a process, but never in those attempts was there healing between government and the communities who were most disproportionately affected by radically oppressive procurement processes. If you think about the very origins of US government and the very first kinds of procurement structures that were put into place, they were, designed to be oppressive. And in the most, so one of the things I think that needs to happen is there needs to be a reckoning where there needs to be, an admission of the system and its origin in a way to sort of heal a little bit. And this is not just about the beginning of our country, it's also about how we evolved and tried to solve for it in set-asides and MWE, BE programs that have all been seen as performative in many ways. And until we actually have an open dialogue about why these structures have failed to create equitable distribution of resources in communities, there's going to be large skepticism from an engagement perspective. And so I think that reckoning needs to happen, and it needs to be very explicit and intentional. And then I think from there, you can actually redefine engagement. Engagement is a model that's already really floundering in the US government context. It does always feel performative. It's the same voices that get heard. It's the same kinds of like town hall structures that are used, or even now where we've digitally taken town halls onto platforms that have actually created further divides. Like, we could use this moment as a way to sort of redefine engagement, but I don't think it's going to be possible without that reckoning, acknowledgement, and a real desire from leadership to actually make significant changes in the field.
Can I just throw in a follow-up here? A lot of this is, for years and years, the excuse is always, oh, there isn't enough resources. And in truth, procurement department themselves are under-resourced. But what do you think, do we have the capacity to raise these questions, to shake things up? Are we wasting our time referring to kind of resources that stop us from doing one or the other, from doing engagement well, from doing procurement well, from shaking things up? Like who has the capacity in government to actually take on this kind of transition you're describing?
So, I think Bruce was saying that they have a chief innovation officer. They should be partnering with these other organizations within governments to help usher in these conversations and to have it feel very programmatic and very much led from City Hall. If the procurement team endeavors to try to do this work in a silo or in a vacuum, it will never work. Like, I will tell you, as someone who lives in Baltimore, I would never go to a meeting like called by the procurement director of the city of Baltimore to talk about engagement. It doesn't sound very appealing. But if it was positioned in the right way, and that's why you have designers and you have new skills in these cities' halls, we got to start using them. I also think that, like, just like the legal barriers to doing things differently, the sort of resource barriers to doing things differently is also a bit of a false barrier, because if we really cared about this and if we actually were really doing it well, it would be resourced at the level where it needs to be resourced. But it's always looked upon as a deficit, and until we have that paradigm shift, it will be funded and resourced as a deficit. And so I think, like, we have to shift again. It is a leadership shift. They have to understand the power that's in procurement, and when it clicks, I think we'll see a completely different approach to resource.
If I'm allowed to. One of the things that we have taken and been very intentional about is the city doesn't have the resources to do everything, but some of our strategic partners have those resources. So we have been very active in establishing very meaningful, intentional partnerships with the SBA, both the Hispanic and Greater Chambers that we have here, and our Builders Coalition here, to help provide resources that the city does not and cannot fund. So we have those relationships. We receive grants and participate in cohorts so that if the city cannot provide this resource, or we don't want to duplicate resources that our partners already provide, but we want to collaborate with our strategic partners to the community of excellence to guide the citizens, nonprofits to the appropriate resources that the city provides and also our strategic partners.
So I'm going to jump in. Mandu, I know that you raised your hand. I want to give, we're at time, so I'll ask Keisha to briefly formally wrap up this this hour, but we can, those of you who would like to continue the conversation and can stay on a few minutes, we have a little after party, so just stick around and we can continue the conversation, but please, anyone, panelists or guests, you of course released to leave as you need. So Keisha, do you want to kind of do your wrap up briefly?
Hello, yes, thank you everyone for coming. As you exit, we just want to do one last bit of feedback from everyone. We would love to hear what's one word that you hope will be used to describe the culture of procurement in 2030. Yeah, as you sign off, please share your thoughts, your ideas, your words based on this conversation. Hopefully you've been inspired about what needs to change. And yeah, thank you so much for joining us. Also, we do want to keep the conversation going. Please feel free to email myself or Riley. Follow us in open contracting and join our after hours and keep the conversation going. We'll also be able to share the recordings, and we'll be sending newsletters and follow up as well with takeaways from these conversations. And lastly, we have a survey. We'd love to hear from you how this series has been for you so that we can improve future sessions. But thank you all so much. Thanks for joining. Feel free to leave your words in the chat, what you hope the culture of procurement will be in 2030. And yeah, we'll see you soon. And stick around for the after hours. We'll give people a minute or so to drop off, but we'll pick the conversation back up. And Mandu, yes, definitely want to hear from you first. I'll play a little bit of outro music. Oh. Thanks, folks, for joining.
Is it okay to start the after party?
Yeah.
So,
we'll give it a minute.
Mandu,
Yeah.
you want to kind of start by, I think you put some of it into your chat, but maybe.
Yeah, and then unfortunately I do have to hop, but thank you for a great conversation. And just on the resources. So first of all, on the government side, obviously it depends on the government, right? I think in the case of really big agencies, certainly in the Northeast, it's more about focus, right? It's like we do so much and we could do a bit less, but more strategically focused and get it done more effectively. That's often part of the challenge. I also just want to push back against this. Certainly in New York State, a lot of the history of why procurement is so complicated is frankly just that we have so many well-intentioned rules and regulations that all together come up into like a really, it just gets very, very, very complicated. And that's not, it's there's a lot of histories colliding there. And it's not, intentional by anyone or anything like that. It just became more and more and more and more complicated over time. And nobody quite knows how to like untie this Gordian knot. But, in terms of advocates and electeds and journalists and stuff like that, not looking at procurement, I think, they're just not interested, or it seems boring. It's not as interesting as housing policy or climate change or whatever latest Twitter thing, I think, that's why they're, it'd be really exciting to know how to make that more interesting to them, at least on some superficial level. I'd love to know how to do that. because it's not that they need to be super in the weeds, but just enough to ask questions, enough to keep, all of this, keep attention and keep leadership engaged and all of those good things.